The first thing I felt when I opened my eyes was a slap across my face. Not a metaphor, not a memory, an actual palm ringed with jade, smelling of osmanthus and entitlement, connecting with my left cheek hard enough to rock my head sideways and split the inside of my lip. The taste of blood flooded my mouth, copper and warm, and for one disorienting second, I could not remember where I was, who I was, or why the ceiling above me was painted with golden cranes instead of the water-stained plaster of my rented apartment in Chengdu. Then the memories hit. Not my memories, hers. They crashed into me like a wave breaking against a seawall, 23 years of a woman's life compressed into a single drowning moment. Her name, her face, her grief, the particular flavor of humiliation she had swallowed so many times it had become indistinguishable from ordinary hunger. Her name was Shen Wanru. She was 41 years old. She was kneeling on cold stone floors in the main hall of the Liang clan compound, and the woman who had just struck her was her mother-in-law, Lady Liang Huifeng, who held her ringed hand aloft as though preparing to strike again. My name, in the life I had just left, was Dr. Chen Mei Ying, trauma surgeon, 12 years in emergency medicine, dead, apparently, at 38 because I had tried to cross a street in the rain while reading a lab report on my phone. A spectacular way to go. I pressed the back of my hand to my bleeding lip, and I looked up at Lady Liang Huifeng with what must have been a very strange expression on my face, because the old woman faltered. "You dare look at me like that?" she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Good, I thought. Let it lose more. I took stock of my body. Shen Wanru, now, was thin in the way that women who have not been eating properly for years are thin. There were bruises on both forearms that had yellowed to the color of old paper. My knees ached from the cold stone and from the particular memory of having knelt in this exact spot many times before. My hair was coming loose from its pin, and my outer robe was the plain gray of a woman who had been stripped of household authority. The hall around me was full of people, the entire Liang clan assembled for what they thought would be a routine humiliation. Lady Liang Huifeng in the center, flanked by her two daughters, Liang Suifen and Liang Baoling, both wearing the smug expressions of women at a meal they have anticipated for weeks. To the left, the clan elders, 3 old men whose combined moral courage would not fill a teacup, and behind me I could feel the presence of 2 more people whose significance hit me through Wanru's memories like a kick to the sternum. Her son, Liang Zonghao, 17 years old, who had stood in this very hall 2 days ago and called his mother a liability to the family's reputation, who had told the clan elders that she was unstable, incompetent, an embarrassment, who had signed the document that proposed stripping her of her position as first wife and relegating her to the status of a dependent, fed and housed out of charity, permitted no authority over anything. Her daughter, Liang Xiaoye, 11 years old, who was standing in the far corner behind a pillar, small and silent and shaking, trying to make herself invisible so that her mother would not suffer more on her account. My daughter. The word settled into my chest and became something immovable. I had no children in my previous life. I had wanted them, distantly, like you want things you keep postponing, but I had postponed everything for the hospital, for the cases, for the next patient who needed someone with steady hands and a clear head. I had postponed and postponed until a rainy afternoon and a pharmaceutical lab report settled the question permanently. But here, behind that pillar, was an 11-year-old girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's sharp cheekbones, wearing a robe that was clean but too small for her, gripping the edge of the lacquered wood as though it were the only solid thing left in her world. "Hello," I thought, across the room to a child who could not hear me. "I'm going to take very good care of you." Then I turned back to Lady Liang Huifeng, who was still holding her ringed hand in the air, and I said, in Wanru's voice, lower than I expected, roughened by years of suppressed words, "Strike me again, mother-in-law, and I will strike you back." The hall went absolutely silent. Lady Liang Huifeng's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "What did you say?" "I said," I repeated, carefully, pleasantly, "that if you raise your hand to me again, I will raise mine to you. I will do it in front of the clan elders, and I will do it without hesitation, and I will not apologize afterward." I paused. I want to be very clear about this because I understand there may be some confusion about who I am today. The woman who knelt here before and accepted whatever you chose to do to her. I am not her. I will not be her again. One of the elder men made a strangled sound. Liang Suifen, the elder of my two sisters-in-law, actually stepped backward. And from behind her mother's right shoulder, my son, Liang Zonghao, looked at me with an expression I read instantly: contempt, irritation, and the absolute conviction that this outburst would be used against me. He was a beautiful boy. Wanru's memories told me that she had loved him with the desperate, bottomless love of a woman who had nothing else to pour herself into. His father, my late husband, Liang Zhangshan, dead 4 years now, had treated Wanru like furniture with feelings, pleasant to have around until the feelings became inconvenient. And somehow, systematically, over 17 years, Zonghao had been shaped into a smaller, sharper version of his father. Or perhaps I was being unfair. He was 17, the clay was not yet fired. But the document he had signed, the one that proposed making his own mother a dependent, stripping her of all authority so that he could consolidate the household accounts under his own name before his coming-of-age ceremony, that document was not the action of a confused boy. That was a calculated move made by someone who had learned to see his mother as an obstacle. He had learned it from this room, from these people. I rose from my knees without being given permission. Every person in the hall stiffened. Rising without being dismissed was a violation of clan protocol so fundamental that no one in this room had apparently ever seen it done. Lady Lian Huifang looked as though a table had suddenly stood up and walked. I straightened my robe, I repinned my hair with the single hairpin that remained, using the reflection in the polished surface of the hall's ceremonial bronze mirror to guide my hands. Then I turned and looked at the 3 clan elders. Elder Bao, Elder Meng, Elder Chui, thank you for assembling today. Since we are all gathered, I would like to formally respond to the document that was circulated 3 days ago. Elder Bao, who was the eldest and therefore most accustomed to being obeyed, recovered first. Lady Sen, the document has already been reviewed. By whom? I asked. He blinked. By the clan. Has it been reviewed by the family steward? Has it been reviewed by the account keeper? Has anyone in this room actually read the household ledgers for the past 12 months? I looked around the hall with an expression of polite, genuine curiosity. Because I have read them, all of them, and I have some concerns about certain expenditures that I believe the clan elders would find very interesting. From the corner of my eye, I saw my son's jaw tighten. Good. He knew what I was referring to. Wanru had been meticulous, silently, invisibly meticulous, because she had nothing else. In the years since her husband's death, she had managed the household accounts with the particular precision of a woman who knows that the moment she makes a mistake, she will be blamed for everything. She had kept records of every transaction, every shortfall, every unusual withdrawal, filed in a locked box beneath the floorboard of her sleeping chamber that no one had ever thought to search because no one had ever credited her with enough intelligence to maintain private records. Liang Zonghao had over the past 8 months quietly withdrawn 1,100 silver taels from the household reserves for purposes that were recorded in the ledger as cultivation materials and sect fees. He was not a cultivator. He had no sect affiliation. The Liang clan was a merchant family, wealthy and well-connected, with no involvement in the martial or spiritual arts. The money had gone somewhere else. I knew where. Wanru had suspected but was not certain. I had the advantage of a modern forensic accounting background. I had spent 2 years as a hospital department head before returning to surgery, and I learned to read financial documents with the same methodical attention I gave to a patient's chart. The money had gone to a woman named Mei Mi Jinghua, who lived in the pleasure district on the eastern side of the city, and who was based on the pattern of withdrawals, either a very expensive habit or a very expensive plan. 17 years old, I thought, looking at my son, and already learning his father's particular curriculum. The ledgers, I continued, addressing the elders, show several discrepancies that I have documented and summarized. I reached into the front of my robe. They all watched this with visible unease, as though I might produce a weapon, and withdrew a folded set of papers. I have prepared 3 copies, one for each elder. I had prepared them, that is, the body had prepared them in the hours before this assembly, while I was not yet in it. Wanru had spent the entire previous night writing, her hands shaking with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has decided, for the first time in her life, to fight. She had fought, and then she had died in her sleep of a heart that had simply given out. The physicians who came in the morning would later say that the strain of years had finally accumulated to a critical point, and I had arrived in her place. I did not understand the mechanics of transmigration. I suspected no one did. But I understood what she had left me: her body, her records, her daughter, and 23 years of rage that had been refined by suffering into something cold and precise and entirely without mercy. I would use all of it. Elder Meng unfolded the first copy with the careful movements of a man who suspects he is being handed something dangerous and is not yet sure how dangerous. He read the first page. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "These are serious allegations," he said. "They are documented facts," I said pleasantly. "The allegations, if Elder Meng is interested in them, are on page 3. Elder Kui, who had always been Lady Liang Huifang's closest ally among the elders, set his copy down without reading it. "Lady Shen," he said, "this assembly was convened to address your recent conduct, not to—" "My recent conduct?" I turned to look at him with what I hoped was the expression of a woman who finds a particular topic genuinely, deeply interesting. "What conduct is Elder Kui referring to?" He faltered. Your instability, your refusal to properly manage the household, the incident with the cook last—" "The cook," I said, "stole from the household pantry. When I addressed it, she claimed that young Master Liang had authorized her to take what she needed. When I asked young Master Liang to clarify, he told me in front of the household staff that I had no authority over kitchen arrangements, and that if I disagreed, I could take my complaints to the courtyard and speak to the fish." I paused. "I dismissed the cook. I stand by that decision." Zheng Hao's face had gone carefully blank. He was quick, I noted. He understood that the room was shifting, that something had changed in his mother's composition overnight, and he was recalibrating, watching, waiting. He would not wait long enough. "Furthermore," I said, turning back to the elders, "I would like to formally object to the document proposing my reclassification as a dependent. As first wife of the late Liang Jiangshan, and as the holder of the household authority deed, which I have here," I produced a second document, the original bearing my late husband's seal and the clan's own verification mark, "my authority over this household cannot be revoked without my consent or a finding of gross misconduct by the full clan council. Not the 3 elders assembled today, the full council, which includes members currently traveling who have not been notified of this assembly." Elder Bao looked at Elder Meng. Elder Meng looked at the document in my hands. Lady Liang Huifang found her voice. "You scheming little—" "Mother-in-law," I said, and the title came out wrapped in something that was not warmth exactly, but was shaped like it, the way a blade can be shaped like a key. Her gaze held. I held her gaze. I would hate for it to become unpleasant. I would hate for it even more than you would. The threat was delivered quietly, in the voice of a woman who is absolutely certain she can execute it. Lady Liang Huifeng, who had spent 4 decades ruling this compound through the weapon of other people's fear of her displeasure, recognized the sound of certainty when she heard it. She closed her mouth. From behind the pillar, I heard a small sound, the softest possible intake of breath. I turned and found Liang Xiaoyu looking at me from around the edge of the lacquered wood. Her dark eyes were wide. They were the exact shape of the eyes in the bronze mirror, the eyes I had looked into when I pinned my hair, the eyes I now wore. She was watching me the way a person watches something they can't quite believe is real. I held out my hand to her. After a moment that stretched long enough for the entire hall to watch, long enough for Lady Liang Huifeng to begin to speak and think better of it, long enough for Zheng Hao's blank expression to flicker with something unreadable, my daughter left the shelter of the pillar and crossed the room to me. She took my hand. Her fingers were cold. I wrapped both of mine around them. "Elder Bao," I said, not looking away from Xiaoye's face, "I would like to reschedule this assembly for a date when the full council can be present and when I have had an opportunity to consult with the family's legal representative. I believe 7 days is sufficient. Do you agree?" There was a pause. Then Elder Bao, who was, at his core, a man who had spent 70 years reading the direction of political winds, said, "7 days seems reasonable." Lady Liang Huifeng made a sound like something tearing. I looked at her finally, over the top of my daughter's head, and I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a trauma surgeon at the beginning of a very long and difficult operation. Focused, controlled, and entirely without doubt about the outcome. "Thank you, mother-in-law," I said, "for everything." I had moved through impossible situations before. In my previous life, I had stood in emergency rooms while everything collapsed at once. 3 critical patients, 2 nurses short, equipment failing, and I had prioritized, stabilized, and kept moving. The capacity for calm under catastrophic pressure is not something you are born with. It is something you build, procedure by procedure, year by year, until the noise of a crisis becomes simply information to be processed. The Liang clan compound was a crisis. I spent the rest of that day in Wanru's chamber, my chamber, with Xiaoye sitting on the low table beside me, swinging her feet, while I worked through the full ledgers from the past 3 years. The child said almost nothing for the first 2 hours. She was watching me with the intense, watchful attention of a small creature that has learned not to trust sudden kindness. Eventually, she said, very quietly, "Are you angry, Mother?" I said, "Not at you," without looking up. "But are you angry?" I set down my brush and looked at her. 11 years old, with eyes that had learned to read rooms before she had learned to read characters. A child who had developed, as children in difficult households do, an exquisite sensitivity to the emotional weather of every person around her. "No," I said, "I am not angry. I am working." She considered this. "You seem different." "I am." She frowned, the small, particular frown of someone solving a problem. "Did you sleep well last night?" "No," I said, which was true in the most fundamental sense possible. "Your grandmother says that you've always been weak." Then she added quickly, the instinctive apology of a child that has learned to cushion truths, "I don't think so. She says it a lot." "I know what your grandmother says about me. She is mistaken. She has been mistaken for a long time, and no one corrected her because it was easier not to." I paused. "I am going to correct her now. It will take some time. There will be unpleasant moments. But I want you to understand something, Xiaoye." She looked at me very carefully, the way she looked at everything. "Nothing that happens in the next weeks or months is your fault. Nothing in this family is your fault. You did not cause any of it. You have never caused any of it." I held her gaze. Do you understand what I am saying?" Something moved across her face, a complicated flicker, part relief and part devastation, the particular expression of someone who has been carrying a weight they were never meant to carry and has just been told they can put it down. "Grandmother says that if you'd borne more sons—" "Your grandmother," I said carefully, "will be saying considerably less in the near future." Xiaoya stared at me. Then, startlingly, she smiled, and it transformed her face entirely, a bright and slightly dangerous smile that told me that behind all that watchful quiet there was a person of considerable spirit who had simply learned to keep it locked away for safekeeping. "Mother," she said. "Yes? I'm glad you're different today." I looked at this child, this sharp-eyed, soft-hearted, magnificently careful child, and felt something that had no name in either the language I'd been born speaking or the one I'd just inherited. Something that settled in the chest like the first breath after surfacing. Something I had postponed and postponed in my other life until postponing was no longer possible.
"So am I," I said. "My son came to my chamber that night. I had expected this. Zhang Hao was not stupid. He was the opposite of stupid, which was in some ways a more difficult problem. He had enough intelligence to recognize that the situation had changed, enough pride to resent it, and enough strategic instinct to come to me before the 7 days were up, in private, to assess the new landscape. He knocked. I told him to enter. He stood in the doorway for a moment, tall, broad-shouldered in the way of young men who are still growing into themselves, dressed in the deep blue robes of a Liang heir apparent, and I saw him looking for the mother he had known that morning, and not finding her. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. His voice was careful. "Sit down, Zhang Hao." He sat across the low table from me. The lamp between us cast his face in warm light and deep shadow, and I studied him the way I would study a new patient, without judgment yet, gathering information. Wanru had loved him. The love was still there in the body I was wearing, a deep and structural love that could not be argued with because it had been built over 17 years, bone by bone. But love, I had learned in emergency medicine, is not the same as blindness. You can love someone and still see them clearly. You can love someone and still refuse to allow them to hurt themselves or others. "You should know," he said, "that what happened today will have consequences." "Yes," I agreed, "it will." He blinked, apparently expecting more argument. "The clan will—" "The clan," I said, "is a collection of individuals with individual interests, and I have spent the past 23 years learning exactly what those interests are and where the pressure points lie. The 3 elders you've been cultivating goodwill with, Elder Bao, as you know, cares primarily about the clan's financial security. Elder Meng cares about legal standing and reputation. Elder Kui cares about Lady Liang Huifeng, and Lady Liang Huifeng cares about status. I can work with all of these concerns." I folded my hands. "Can you?" He was quiet. "Zhang Hao," I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Not to placate me, not to manage me. Carefully, the way you would think through a problem that actually matters to you." He met my eyes. His were wary, but he was listening. "Why did you sign that document?" A pause. I watched him compose a response, then discard it, then compose another. "Because," he said finally, "the household needs strong leadership, and you—" he stopped. "And I what?" "You cry," he said. It came out with something underneath it, not cruelty exactly, but the contempt of someone who has decided that tears are weakness and has constructed his entire self around not having them. "When father's creditors came, you cried. When the autumn harvest accounts were short, you cried. When things were difficult, you cried, and nothing changed, and the household needed—"
What the household needed was for someone to help me instead of adding to the weight. What the household needed was for a son to stand beside his mother instead of signing a document designed to remove her. I kept my voice level. Grief is not weakness. Tears are not incompetence. I ran this household for 12 years under conditions that would have broken most people, and I did it while managing your grandmother's interference and your increasing contempt and your father's financial disasters, the full scope of which you do not yet know because you were never interested in learning the details, only in deciding that someone else was responsible for all of them. His jaw was tight. I am not contemptuous. I told you to speak to the fish. He said nothing. You said it in front of the staff. You said it as though I were nothing, as though 23 years and the body I broke raising you earned me nothing but that. I looked at him steadily. Do you understand how that felt? Something moved across his face, something brief and young, quickly suppressed. He had learned somewhere in these 17 years to suppress it quickly. I am your mother, not your enemy, not an obstacle. Your mother, and I am telling you clearly right now that what you have been doing, what this family has been teaching you to do, will ruin you. Not immediately, but the kind of person you are becoming will cause suffering, and eventually that suffering will circle back.
He looked at the lamp. I am also telling you, I said, that it is not too late. You are 17. The man you become is not yet fixed. I paused. But I will not pretend what you did was acceptable. The document must be withdrawn, formally, with an apology to the clan elders for the improper assembly, and the funds you withdrew from the household accounts must be returned and properly accounted for. His head came up sharply. Yes, I said, I know about the money. I know where it went. I know who she is. I held his gaze without anger, which seemed to disturb him more than anger would have. I am not, and that it stops. She is not your future. She is someone else's arrangement, designed to reach your family's money, and I would rather you learn that from me than from the consequences. The silence stretched. Then something happened that Wanru's memories told me had never happened before, not once in 17 years of this boy's life. His composure cracked. Not completely, he was too well armored for that, but at the edges, where the armor was young and had not yet been properly forged. How do you know all of this? He said. His voice was different, less measured, more raw. Because, I said simply, I have been paying attention to you your entire life. I know exactly who you are, Zhonghao, including the parts you don't show anyone, including the parts you're ashamed of, including the parts you don't know exist yet. I stood and moved to the window, where the night airs smelled of approaching rain and distant osmanthus blossom. Behind me, I could hear my son breathing in a room that had suddenly become too small for all the things neither of us had said. Go to sleep, I said finally. We will speak again tomorrow. There is time for this conversation to go somewhere better, but not tonight. He left. I stood at the window a while longer and listened to the compound settle into nighttime sounds, the watchman's bell, the distant kitchen fires being banked, the small shuffling movement from the next chamber where Xiao Yue had insisted on moving her sleeping mat closer to my wall after the assembly. 11 years old and already trying to protect me. I pressed my forehead to the cool wooden frame of the window and permitted myself, very briefly, the particular grief of arriving somewhere enormous too late, a life's worth of love that had been here all along, waiting for someone to be present enough to receive it. Then I straightened, and I went back to the ledgers, because the 7-day assembly was coming, and I intended to walk into it with everything. Lady Liang Huifang had run this family for 40 years by making other people small. I had spent 12 years in emergency medicine making impossible things possible with whatever was on hand. Let us see, I thought, which skill set proved more durable. The 7 days before the full council assembly were the quietest war I had ever fought. In surgery, the most dangerous operations are not the ones where everything is visibly catastrophic, where the bleeding is obvious and the damage is clear, and every hand in the room knows exactly what is at stake. The most dangerous operations are the ones where the surface looks calm, where the patient's vitals are holding, where the other surgeons are leaning back, relaxing, beginning to believe the worst is over. Those are the operations where you stay very, very alert because something is always waiting beneath the surface that the readings haven't shown you yet. The Liang compound in the 7 days after the assembly looked calm. Lady Liang Huifang retired to her private courtyard and received no visitors. Liang Kuifen and Liang Baoling, my sisters-in-law, moved through the household with their usual brittle elegance, but said nothing to me directly. Chang Hao ate his meals, attended to his studies, and came to my chamber each morning, not to fight, but to sit across the table in the uneasy silence of a young man who has had a conversation he cannot unhave and does not yet know what to do with it. And in the eastern wing, in the rooms that had not been properly swept since the death of my late husband, a door that I had not previously known existed turned out to conceal a correspondence that changed everything. I found it on the 3rd day. Xiao Ye found it first, actually. She had taken to following me through the household in the afternoons, not underfoot, she was too careful for that, but present, a quiet shadow 3 steps behind, watching how I moved through rooms that had always belonged to other people and treated them as though they belonged to me. I noticed she was taking notes in the small way that children take notes, cataloging and filing and waiting. On the 3rd afternoon, she appeared at my elbow in the corridor outside the Eastern Wing study and said, very casually, "Mother, there is a loose board behind the writing desk in there." I looked at her. She looked back, the picture of innocent observation. "How long have you known about it?" I asked. 2 years, she said. "Have you looked inside?" "No." A pause. I was waiting. I understood what she had been waiting for. She had been waiting for someone she trusted enough to bring it to. 23 years of Wanru's memories told me that no one had ever been that person for Xiao Ye before, that this child had been carrying her small private secrets alone in the particular way of children who have learned that adults in their world are not safe repositories. I took her hand and we went to look at the loose board together. What was inside was not a cache of treasure or a hidden cultivation manual. It was a bundle of letters, tied with red cord that had faded to rust, wrapped in oilskin to protect against moisture. 43 letters in total, written in a hand I did not recognize, but Wanru's body did, the particular cramped brushwork of Liang Jingshan, my late husband, written to his mother, written during the years of his marriage to Wanru. I sent Xiao Ye to fetch tea and took the letters to the window where the afternoon light was strongest, and I read every one. By the time Xiao Ye returned, I had read them twice and sorted them by date and sat for a long while looking at the courtyard wall without seeing it. I had come into this body knowing that my late husband had been unkind to Wanru. Her memories had given me that clearly enough. The dismissals, the public diminishments, the way he smiled at other women in his own house while his wife managed his accounts and raised his children and kept his household running with the quiet efficiency that he never noticed because he had never looked. He had not been a good husband. What I had not known, what Wanru had not known, was that it had been deliberate. The letters to his mother were not the letters of a neglectful man. They were the letters of a man who had been coached. Lady Liang Huifang had written to her son. Her letters were not here, but his responses quoted her guidance extensively, with specific instructions on how to manage his first wife. Keep her isolated from her natal family, because a woman with strong family support is a woman with options. Keep her managing the household accounts so that she feels responsible for every shortfall and blames herself for every difficulty. Do not allow her close friendships among the household staff. Praise her in public,
just enough that no one suspects mistreatment, but make her feel, in private, that she is always failing. 43 letters. 12 years of a marriage architectured by a mother-in-law with the cold precision of a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and why. And at the end of the bundle, dated 6 months before Liang Jingshan's death, a letter that I read 3 times before I fully understood it. Mother, I have done as you suggested and revised the accounts. W will not find the secondary ledger. If she does, she will not understand it. I have transferred the Donghua Street properties to the name you specified. Liang Cuifen's husband will manage them for us until Zhang Hao comes to age, at which point we had agreed they would revert. I confess I am uneasy. W has done nothing to deserve. But you are right that sentiment is a luxury. The boy must have a proper inheritance, and she cannot be allowed. The letter ended there. An ink blot at the cutoff point suggested it had been interrupted and then perhaps revised before sending. This was the rough draft, kept by accident or by guilt. There were properties, real properties, commercial properties on one of the city's main trading streets that had been stripped from the household accounts and concealed under my sister-in-law's husband's name before my late husband's death, specifically to reduce the inheritance that would fall under my management. My son had been robbed of his own inheritance by his grandmother, using his father as the instrument, and then had been brought up to believe that his mother's incompetence was responsible for the household's reduced circumstances. I sat very still with this information for a very long time. Xiaoye set the tea tray down beside me and looked at my face and said nothing, which was, I was beginning to understand, one of her greatest gifts. Xiaoye. Yes, mother. What do you know about the Donghua Street properties? She was quiet for a moment, then she said, carefully, Uncle Fei, Aunt Cuifen's husband, collects rent from there. He has for as long as I can remember. I heard him talking about it once with grandmother. I didn't understand what they were saying. How much do you remember of what they said? She folded her hands in her lap with the studied composure of a child who has learned to hold herself very still so she can listen more effectively, and she told me, word for word, every detail, the complete and verbatim account of a conversation she had overheard 2 years ago, at age 9, while pretending to arrange flowers in the corridor outside the receiving room. I stared at my daughter. She looked back at me with those dark, careful eyes, waiting to see if what she'd given me was useful. Xiaoye. Yes, mother. You are remarkable. The dangerous smile appeared again, brief and bright like lightning. On the 5th day, Zhang Hao came to my chamber in the morning as he had every morning that week, and instead of sitting in silence across the table, he placed a document in front of me and pushed it across without speaking. It was the withdrawal records, all of them, meticulously copied in his own hand, with annotations explaining each transaction. Honest annotations, not constructed excuses. The money spent on Mei Jinghua, the approximate timeline of how the arrangement had begun, which had been at the suggestion of a friend whose name I noted and filed, the exact remaining sum which he proposed to restore from his own quarterly allowance over 14 months. 14 months. He had done the arithmetic. At the bottom of the page, in smaller characters than the rest, he had written, I told her it was finished. She accepted this. I believe the matter is settled on that side. I read it through twice. Then I folded it and set it on the stack of documents I had been building, the growing architecture of what I would bring to the full council. Sit down, I said. He sat. You did the accounting yourself? You would have caught any errors. A pause. I did not want you to catch errors.
There was something in this, the particular dignity of a young man who has decided to be honest, not because he has been forced to, but because he cannot stand the alternative, that I recognized. It was the same quality that occasionally appeared in the most unlikely patients, the ones who, in the middle of the worst moment of their lives, suddenly decided to be precise. "The friend who introduced you to Mei Jinghua," I said, "is he a close friend?" Something flickered in Zhonghao's expression. Caution. Why? "Because the arrangement was deliberate," I said. "She was not a coincidence. Someone introduced her to you specifically, knowing who you were and what family you came from, and the timing, 8 months ago, corresponds to a period when certain other people had reason to want our household's finances destabilized." I watched his face. "I am not asking you to betray a friendship lightly. I am telling you that the friendship may not be what you believe it is." He looked at the table. "His name is Fei Boran," he said quietly. "My sister-in-law's husband had a younger brother. Of course he did." "Thank you," I said. "Mother." He looked up. His face was doing the complicated thing again, the thing where the armor sat badly over something younger and more uncertain underneath. "The document I signed, the one proposing, I know. I want to withdraw it. I know that too. I mean," he stopped, recalibrated, started again the way he would start again after today, I hoped, whenever a first attempt failed him. "I thought you didn't care about any of it, about the household or about... You always seemed so far away, like you were managing a problem, not living a life. And grandmother said..." "Your grandmother," I said, "has been building a particular version of me in your mind since before you were old enough to question it. What she told you about me, some of it may have felt true, because she is very skilled at building things that feel true." I paused. "But I need you to understand something about the version of me you saw growing up." He waited. "I was not far away," I said. "I was surviving. There's a difference. Surviving looks like distance when you are the one doing it, and it looks like coldness or absence to the people watching. But I was present for every moment of your life, Zhonghao. I simply did not have the resources to show you what that presence looked like, because every resource I had was being spent on keeping us all from going under." I held his gaze. "That was not your fault either. It was not my fault. There were other people in this household who made choices that had consequences, and those people will be accounted for, but I need you to stop mistaking survival for abandonment." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a sparrow landed on the garden wall, ruffled itself against the morning chill, and flew away. "The way I spoke to you," he said finally, "in front of the staff, what I said. Yes, he exhaled. It was a rough sound from the chest. "I am sorry, Mother." 3 words from a 17-year-old boy who had been taught systematically that apology is weakness. 3 words that had clearly cost him something real, delivered without performance, without strategy, without any of the careful social management I had watched him deploy every other moment since I had arrived in this body. I did not make a speech of it. I did not reward it with excessive warmth, which would have embarrassed him, or with coldness, which would have punished him for trying. I simply accepted it the way you accept something that is being offered with difficulty and deserves to be received with dignity. "Accepted," I said. "Now, tell me about Elder Bao. You've spent 6 months building goodwill with him. What does he actually want?" He blinked at the sudden shift. Then, tentatively, he reached for the topic the way a person reaches for a door they're not sure is safe to open. "He wants Zhonghao to be appointed as a trade representative to the provincial governor's office. He believes it would benefit the clan's commercial standing. He's been proposing it to grandmother for 2 years now, and she keeps refusing because she wants me to remain in the household. And under her influence, I think, though he wouldn't phrase it that way." I filed this. "What does Elder Meng actually want?" He sat forward slightly, engaged now, beginning, perhaps, to realize that his mother was not asking these questions for small talk. "He wants the clan's legal charter renewed before the new provincial magistrate takes his position. There are several clauses in the current charter that are... He thinks they're vulnerable to challenge. He's been trying to get grandmother to commission a legal review for 18 months. And she has refused. She doesn't see the need." "Of course she doesn't," I said. She has been managing this family's legal standing through personal relationships rather than sound documentation, and personal relationships do not outlive the people who hold them. I made a note. Right. Here is what I would like you to do today. He looked at me with an expression that was new, attentive, slightly uncertain, but willing, like someone standing at the beginning of a path they have not taken before and choosing, despite the uncertainty, to take a step. Yes, he said. I told him. The night before the full council assembly, I sat with Xiao Wei until the lamp had burned low, and I taught her to play Wei Qi. Not seriously, or rather seriously but without pressure, the distinction being that I explained the rules and the logic and let her play without correcting every move, watching how she thought, watching the way her mind worked across the grid. She was intuitive rather than systematic, which is the harder quality to teach and the more powerful one when it has been properly trained. She would capture 3 pieces brilliantly and then leave herself exposed in a corner out of impatience. We would work on the corner. "Mother," she said, placing a stone with the careful deliberation of someone who has just discovered that slowing down produces better results. "Are you frightened about tomorrow?" "No," I said. "Why not?" I considered this. "Because I know what cards everyone at the table is holding, and I know which ones they think are hidden. There is very little that frightens me once I understand the full picture." I paused. "Are you frightened?" She placed another stone, considered the board. "A little. Grandmother she can be very frightening." "She can," I agreed. "She is very skilled at it. But skill is only frightening when you don't know how it works." I moved a stone of my own. "Do you know what I noticed the first day when you came to take my hand in the hall?" She shook her head. "You were afraid, you were shaking, and you came anyway." I held her gaze. "That is not the absence of fear, Xiao Wei. That is courage. They are not the same thing. Courage is the action you take while the fear is still present." She looked at me for a long moment with those old, careful eyes. Then she put her stone down in exactly the right corner, blocking a threat I had left open to see if she would find it. She had found it. "I captured your piece," she said. "You did," I said. "Remember that." The full council of the Liang clan assembled the following morning in the Hall of 10,000 Ancestors, a room that had been built to impress and succeeded with its ceiling of painted silk and its 12 carved pillars and the great scroll of ancestral names stretching from floor to beam along the western wall. 17 members. 11 who were resident in the compound or city, 6 who had been summoned from traveling, 2 of whom had arrived still dusty from the road. Lady Liang Huifeng sat in the seat of the household matriarch, flanked by her daughters. She wore her best outer robe, deep crimson with gold borders, the formal regalia of a woman who intends to command the room from the first moment. I wore white. Not mourning white, ceremonial white, the color of the first wife's formal authority, documented in the clan charter's 3rd section as the color to be worn by the holder of the household deed at any proceeding where that deed's authority was being discussed. The shade was slightly different from mourning white, but I had spent 40 minutes that morning with Wanru's most experienced chambermaid, ensuring that the distinction was visible and unmistakable. Lady Liang Huifeng saw the robe the moment I entered, and her expression did something interesting, a rapid, controlled recalibration, the look of a general who has just seen the opposing army positioned differently than the scouts reported. Good. Chong Hao entered behind me and took his seat among the family members, not beside his grandmother, where he had sat at the previous assembly, but 2 seats to the left, beside the most senior of the traveling council members, Elder Chow, who was 80 years old, sharp as cut glass, and had been sending increasingly terse letters to the compound for 3 years, expressing concern about what he called the drift of household governance.
Chong Hao had met Elder Chow's travel party at the city gate the morning before and escorted them personally to their guest quarters. I did not know what they had discussed. I had not asked him to do it. He had done it because, I suspected, he was beginning to understand that there was a different way to build alliances than the way he had been taught. Elder Chow, seating himself, caught my eye from across the room and inclined his head a fraction. I returned the gesture. Lady Liang Huifeng watched this exchange with an expression I could not quite read. The assembly opened with the formal reading of the clan protocols, conducted by Elder Meng, who was the most legally precise of the elders, and who had been, I knew, reviewing the household charter extensively over the past 7 days, after receiving, via a delivery that could not be traced to me, anonymous summary of the clauses he had long been worried about, along with documentation suggesting that the charter's vulnerabilities had already been identified by the new provincial magistrate's office. Elder Meng read for 12 minutes. He was thorough. He was intended to be thorough. Lady Liang Huifeng grew visibly impatient by the 4th minute. By the 10th, she had interrupted twice, both times smoothly redirected by Elder Meng, who had apparently decided this morning to use his backbone. When the protocols were done, Elder Bao opened the floor. This assembly was convened to address the document proposing the reclassification of Lady Shen Wanru. The document was circulated by young Master Liang Chonghao 7 days ago. Young Master Liang Chonghao, do you wish to speak to this proposal? Every head in the room turned to my son. He stood. His back was straight. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and even, and I watched Lady Liang Huifeng's expression move from expectation to confusion to something harder as the words came out. I wish to formally withdraw the document. I acted without the full picture of the household's situation, and the proposal was premature and improper. I apologize to the council for the improper assembly. A pause. Precisely calibrated, long enough to be sincere, short enough not to be theatrical. I also wish to formally acknowledge that the household deed is validly held by my mother, Lady Shen Wanru, and I have no objection to its continuation. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then it broke into the sound of 17 people shifting and murmuring and reassessing. Lady Liang Huifeng's face had gone the particular color of someone who has experienced a structural failure of a plan they believed was airtight. Her eyes moved from Chong Hao to me and back to Chong Hao with an expression I catalogued carefully. Not just anger, but the particular fury of someone who has lost an instrument they were certain they controlled. She had built my son into a version of her husband. She had spent 17 years building my son into a version of his father, and she had not quite finished the construction before I had gotten there. This is highly irregular, said Elder Kui, who was Lady Huifeng's creature and knew no other way to be.
It is entirely regular, said Elder Meng, who had clearly decided today was the day. The withdrawal of a proposal by its proposer is explicitly permitted under Section 7 of the Council Protocols, which we just reviewed. Nevertheless, I would like to address the Council, I said. The room went quiet. I stood, and I walked to the front of the hall, and I stood between the assembly and the scroll of ancestral names, and I placed my documents on the table before me, and I looked around the room at 17 faces in various states of wariness, curiosity, calculation, and, in the case of Elder Zhao, something that looked remarkably like anticipation. Members of the Liang Council, I said. Thank you for assembling from a distance on short notice. I will be brief. I have 3 matters to bring before this body today, and I ask your patience for each. Lady Liang Huifeng said, Lady Shen, this assembly was not convened for... Forgive me, mother-in-law, I said pleasantly, but the assembly was convened to address matters pertaining to the household deed and household authority. All 3 matters I wish to raise are pertinent to exactly that. I smiled at her. Please, continue, Elder Bao. Elder Bao, who was watching this like a man at a very high-quality theatrical performance, gestured for me to proceed.
I distributed the documents, 3 sets for the 3 elders, with copies available for any council member who wished them. The first matter, I said, concerns the household ledgers. I will not read them aloud in full. The documentation speaks for itself. I will simply note that the past 3 years show a pattern of withdrawals from the household reserves that were not authorized by the deed holder and were recorded under categories that do not correspond to actual expenditures. I let this sit for a moment. The funds in question total approximately 1,500 taels. 8 months of this total has already been identified, accounted for, and a repayment plan established by young Master Liang, as he will confirm. The remainder predates his involvement and represents a separate pattern of withdrawal that I believe requires council review. The remainder, 700 taels, withdrawn in smaller amounts over 2 years, consistently on dates that corresponded to visits by my sister-in-law, Liang Zufan. Liang Zufan's face did not change. She was better at this than I had expected, but her hands, resting in her lap, pressed together just slightly. The second matter, I said, concerns 3 commercial properties on Donghua Street, which were registered under the name of Chen Fi, the husband of council member Liang Zufan, 6 years ago. I have documentation showing that these properties were purchased with household funds and were intended to be temporarily registered in Chen Fi's name pending young Master Liang's coming of age, at which point they would revert to the household. The reversion has not occurred. In fact, Chen Fi transferred title on 2 of the 3 properties 18 months ago to a party I have not yet been able to identify. Now the room was not murmuring. The room was very, very still. I am not making allegations of theft at this time, I said, into the stillness. I am noting discrepancies and requesting that the council authorize a formal review of the property records to be conducted by an independent legal assessor rather than the clan's current legal representative, who is, I should note, Chen Fi's personal appointment. Elder Zhao said from across the room, in the dry, particular tone of a man who has seen a great deal and is occasionally pleased to see that the world can still surprise him, "A very thorough presentation, Lady Shen." "Thank you, Elder Zhao." Lady Liang Huifeng turned to her mother. What passed between them in that glance was not language, but it was extremely legible. Lady Liang Huifeng was no longer the color of controlled fury. She was the color of a woman whose foundation is being methodically dismantled, beam by beam, in public, by someone she had spent 23 years dismissing as furniture with feelings. The third matter, I said, is the most important, and I wish to address it directly to the council. I reached for the last document. In the course of reviewing household records, I came into possession of correspondence that reveals the systematic nature of certain actions taken against this household over a period of 12 years. I did not name the letters, not yet. This correspondence documents deliberate efforts to isolate the first wife from her natal family, manipulate the household accounts to create an appearance of mismanagement under her authority, and divert household assets to other parties in advance of the household head's death, all in order to concentrate control of the Liang household and its assets in a single set of hands. The room had stopped breathing. I am not asking the council to take punitive action today. I am asking only that the council acknowledge, formally in the record, that the household deed is valid, and that my authority as first wife is valid, and that any future proposals to alter my standing in this household must come before the full council, not 3 elders, not an informal assembly, with full documentation.
And proper notice. I folded my hands. These are the protections that the clan charter already guarantees me. I am asking the council to confirm that they will be observed. Elder Bao looked at Elder Meng. Elder Meng looked at Elder Zhao. Elder Zhao looked at Lady Liang Huifeng with the measured regard of a man weighing something he has suspected for years against the evidence now before him. Lady Shen's requests are reasonable and within her charter rights, Elder Zhao said.
I move to affirm them in the record." "Seconded," said Elder Meng. "I object," Elder Cui began. "On what grounds?" said Elder Meng, in the tone of a man who knows the answer will not be sufficient. Silence. "Then the motion carries," said Elder Bao. "Let the record reflect the council's affirmation of Lady Shen Wanru's household authority." Lady Liang Weifang rose. Every person in the room tensed. She had the particular physical authority of a woman who has spent decades ensuring that her rising is followed by outcomes, and the room's body memory responded, even as her actual power was, in this moment, at its lowest point in 40 years. "This council," she said, "has been manipulated by a woman who has never understood her place in this family." "Mother-in-law," I said. She stopped. "If you have evidence to present, please present it to the council for review. That is what this body is for." I paused. "Otherwise, I believe Elder Bao has other matters on the agenda." The silence that followed was not the silence of a room holding its breath. It was the silence of a room exhaling, the particular release of people who have been waiting, in some cases for years, for the wind to change direction. Lady Liang Huifang stood for a moment that was 2 seconds too long, which was, for a woman of her social precision, the equivalent of a public collapse. Then she sat down. Liang Cuifen looked at her hands. Liang Baoling, the younger sister-in-law, who had always been sharper and less committed to her mother's program than Cuifen, caught my eye from across the room and quickly looked away, but not before I registered the expression on her face, which was complicated in a way that I filed for later. A wild card, I thought, or the beginning of one. From his seat 2 chairs from Elder Zhao, Liang Zhonghao was watching me with an expression I could not remember seeing in Wanru's memories of him. Not contempt, not calculation, not the managed blankness he used when he was recalibrating. Something younger than all of those, something that had not yet been given a name. I thought I recognized it. I had seen it in the faces of patients sometimes, in the moments after a procedure, when the crisis was past and the pain had not yet fully registered, and the overwhelming sensation was simply the strange animal gratitude of being still alive and intact. He was looking at me, his mother, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, that she was someone. I did not celebrate that evening. There was nothing to celebrate yet. The council's affirmation was a foundation, not a victory. The property review would take weeks. The correspondence I had found would need to be presented to the clan's independent legal assessor I had already been quietly consulting. Lady Liang Huifang was not finished, not by the length of a dynasty, and Liang Cuifen's husband Chen Fei would have received word of the day's proceedings before nightfall. What I did instead was call for a proper dinner. Not a formal dinner. The Liang clan had formal dinners regularly, and they were magnificent and miserable in equal measure, full of ceremony and status positioning, and the particular exhaustion of eating food you cannot taste because you are too busy managing the room. I called for an informal dinner in my courtyard, small tables set outside because the evening had turned warm, lanterns in the persimmon tree, and the new cook, hired 3 days ago, a woman named Ah Zhu, who had previously worked in the household of a prominent physician and knew her way around both quality ingredients and discretion, told to make whatever she thought was good that night. Xiao Yue came in her informal evening robe, hair loose, and sat beside me with the settled comfort of a child who is beginning to believe that this particular place is safe.
Zhang Hao came after a longer hesitation. He stood at the courtyard gate for a moment before entering, as though confirming that the invitation was real. It was real. I gestured to the seat across from me. He sat. We ate. Ah Zhu had made braised pork belly with plum sauce, a delicate egg and chive dish.
river fish steamed with ginger, and a soup that smelled like the particular comfort of late autumn. It was very good food, eaten in the light of paper lanterns, under a sky that had gone the deep blue of early evening. Xiao Yue told us with complete seriousness about the Wei Qi game from the previous night and how she had identified my deliberately left open corner and chosen to exploit it rather than point it out. She described her strategic reasoning in detail, occasionally using her chopsticks to gesture, apparently unaware that the straightforward confidence with which she discussed her own thought process was not, in fact, a universal trait of 11-year-olds in this era. I watched my son watch his sister. Something shifted in his expression, a slow softening, like ice in spring water. "You played mother at Wei Qi?" he said. "She let me win the corner," Xiao Yue said, slightly indignant, "but I captured the piece properly." "I did not let you win the corner," I said. "I made an error." "You don't make errors at Wei Qi." "Everyone makes errors," I said. "The important thing is what you do when you find one." Zhang Hao looked at me over the soup bowl. There was something in his expression that he had not yet decided whether to say. I waited. "Father," he said finally, he wasn't a good husband to you." It was not a question, it was something he was putting down on the table between us and looking at, finally, in full light. "No," I said. "Did you know that it wasn't accidental?" I said. "I knew something was wrong for a long time. I did not know the full shape of it until this week." I paused. "It does not change the practical matters. What matters is what we do with the household now." "It changes other things," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "It changes other things." We sat with that for a moment, the three of us, in the lantern light. Xiao Yue, who had been following this exchange with her customary precision, put down her chopsticks and said, "Are we going to be all right?" I looked at my daughter, then at my son, who was looking at her with the expression of someone who has just understood that there is someone smaller who needs him to be more than he has been. "Yes," I said, "we are going to be entirely all right." I picked up my soup bowl. "Eat your fish, Xiao Yue. The ginger is Aju's particular skill, and it would be wasteful to let it go cold." She ate her fish. And outside the courtyard wall, in the lamp-lit corridors of the Liang compound, the machinery of consequence continued its patient turning, properties to be reclaimed, letters to be presented, alliances to be rebuilt on honest ground, and one old woman to be given the choice, before everything was done, of what kind of ending she wanted. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight there were lanterns in the persimmon tree and river fish with ginger, and my children at the table. I had not had this in my other life. I held it now with both hands. Chen Fei moved faster than I expected. I had anticipated 3 days before he acted. He moved in 1. By the following morning, before the compound had fully awoken, before Ah Zhu had finished banking the kitchen fires, a messenger arrived at my courtyard gate with a card requesting an urgent private audience, not from Chen Fei himself, which would have been too obvious, but from Liang Suifen, written in the particular tone of a woman who believes she is extending a courtesy. I sent back a card of my own. Lady Shen appreciates elder sister's thoughtfulness and would be pleased to receive her at the 3rd hour of the afternoon in the main sitting room with the household steward present. The household steward present, meaning a witness, meaning whatever is said will be on record. The messenger returned to me within the hour with a reply that declined the main sitting room in favor of a private meeting in my personal chamber, the household steward excluded. I sent back, "The main sitting room at the 3rd hour remains available. Lady Shen looks forward to the meeting." No counteroffer, no explanation. The door was open, the terms were the terms. Liang Suifen arrived at the 3rd hour in the main sitting room with the household steward, a quiet man named Old Tan, who had served the Liang compound for 30 years and had survived every change of regime within it by being absolutely and invisibly reliable, seated at the small writing desk in the corner. She looked at Old Tan, she looked at me, she sat down. I poured tea. This was a deliberate choice. In the household hierarchy, the person who pours tea is the person performing service, and Liang Suifen had spent 23 years watching me pour tea for her. The reversal was barely perceptible. It was entirely perceptible. She accepted the cup without acknowledging it. "Sister-in-law," she began, "I think we have both allowed misunderstandings to accumulate that a frank conversation might resolve." "I agree entirely," I said. "Please, be frank." She set the cup down. She was 44 years old, 2 years older than the body I wore, and she had the particular poise of a woman who has spent her life in rooms where power is negotiated through appearance. Her outer robe was deep green, calculated, I noted, to suggest prosperity without ostentation. Her hair was perfect. Her hands, resting on the table, were almost still. Almost. "The properties on Donghua Street," she said. "I want you to understand that the arrangement was my mother's design, not my husband's. He was asked to hold them. He understood it was temporary. When 2 of the 3 were transferred, he was following instructions that he believed came from proper authority within the household." "Whose instructions?" I asked. A pause. Fractional. "My mother's." "In writing?" Another pause. Longer. "There may be correspondence." "May be," meaning there is, and she has it, and she is deciding whether producing it helps her more than holding it. "Elder sister," I said gently, "I would like to be very direct with you, because I think directness serves us both better than the alternative." I held her gaze. "I am not your enemy. I was never your enemy. I was a woman in a difficult position who managed as best she could, and you were encouraged by people whose interests were not the same as yours to treat me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known." Something moved across her face. Not softness, she was not a soft woman, but a kind of stillness, the recognition of something that has been said accurately. "The properties," I continued, "will be reviewed by the independent legal assessor. That process will proceed regardless of what you and I discuss today. What is still open for discussion is
the nature of your husband's involvement, whether he will be characterized as an instrument of a design he did not initiate or as a principal actor." She looked at me steadily. "What do you want?" "I want the 3rd property," I said, "the one that was not transferred. I want it returned to the household register by the end of this month, with back payment of the rent income that should have been recorded as household revenue over the past 6 years. I picked up my tea. "I also want the correspondence between your mother and your husband, all of it." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, when the legal assessor's report is filed, your husband's involvement will be accurately characterized as secondary, directed, and terminated upon request." I paused. "He will not be characterized as a thief, because if the correspondence shows what I believe it shows, he is not one. He is a man who followed his mother-in-law's instructions without asking questions he should have asked, which is a different and considerably more forgivable failure." Liang Cuifen looked at me for a long time. I watched her calculate the angles, the risks, the relative positions of everyone on the board. She was intelligent. She had her mother's strategic instincts, without, I was beginning to think, her mother's appetite for the kind of cruelty that requires other people's suffering as its ongoing fuel. "The 3rd property and the back payments," she said slowly. "And Fei is characterized as secondary. Accurately characterized as secondary. I will not misrepresent the record in your favor. I will simply ensure that the record is complete rather than partial." She looked at old Tan in the corner. He was writing something at the desk, with the unhurried focus of a man transcribing a document that is entirely routine. "I'll need 3 days," she said. "You have them." She rose, smoothed her robes, and moved to leave. At the doorway, she paused, with her back to me, and she said, without turning around, "The way you handled the assembly yesterday." I waited. "Faye has been married to me for 19 years. My mother chose him for me. He is not an unkind man." A pause. "I have always wondered what it would have been like to choose." She left. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over, the particular loneliness of women in a world built on arrangements, where even the ones who benefit from the architecture are still inside it. Then I picked up my brush and continued writing. Lady Liang Huifeng's move came on the 4th day, which was faster than I had expected, and slower than she could afford. I was teaching Xiaoyue calligraphy in the courtyard, the formal cursive style that was expected of clan daughters at examinations and social events, which Xiaoyue had never been properly taught because no one had considered it sufficiently important, when old Tan appeared at the gate, with the expression of a man delivering a message he finds professionally distasteful. "Lady Shen, Lady Liang Huifeng has convened a meeting of the inner household. She requests your attendance in the family hall immediately." "Requests," I said. "Her precise word, my lady." I set down my brush. I looked at Xiaoyue, who had already straightened and was looking toward the gate with that old wariness back in her eyes, the animal alertness of a child who has learned that disruptions arrive suddenly and often hurt. "Continue practicing the 4th character," I said to her. "I'll review it when I return." I met her eyes. "This is routine. Everything is fine." She looked at me for a moment, then at the brush in her hand, and then she bent over the paper and began to write with the focused deliberateness of someone choosing trust as an active decision rather than a default. I followed old Tan to the family hall. The inner household was assembled, Lady Liang Huifeng at the head, Liang Baoling beside her, Kuifen notably absent, which told me the correspondence was already being compiled, and 3 of the household's longer-serving staff, the head housekeeper, the senior kitchen manager, and the gatekeeper. All 3 wore expressions of people who have been told to attend something and are hoping very hard that it ends quickly. Standing to one side of the room, and this was the element I had not anticipated, was a man I did not recognize from Wanru's memories, which meant he was either new to the compound or had been deliberately kept from her. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed in the robes of a professional, carrying a document case of good leather. Lady Liang Huifeng said, "Lady Shen, thank you for joining us.